Why did she even open her mouth? That was the question echoing in Sarah Martinez's head long after the words had already slipped out. She hadn't meant to correct them. She hadn't meant to draw attention. But sometimes silence burns more than speech, and that afternoon in the armory, the silence had felt unbearable. Sarah was 23 years old, a supply clerk at Fort Harrison, and by every measure of the military hierarchy she was invisible. Her days were filled with numbers, inventory sheets, and the smell of gun oil that never quite washed out of her uniform. Rows of rifles stood at attention in the armory racks, more disciplined than most soldiers she knew. She kept them pristine, ready for whoever signed the logbook. It was steady work, necessary work, but it wasn't heroic. No one ever told stories about the quiet girl behind the counter. That morning had been like countless others. Sarah arrived at 700 sharp, clutching a coffee that was already lukewarm. The armory was quiet, only a few privates drifting in for training rifles. The silence of the building was familiar, almost comforting. She could hear her own boots scuff against the concrete floor as she moved through her routine, dusting displays, running serial checks, updating the endless spreadsheets that proved she was reliable if nothing else. She wasn't expecting her life to tilt sideways that day. She wasn't expecting an arrogant young sniper to make her feel small, or a single sentence from her own mouth to set in motion something that would change everything. It began at noon when the special operations snipers filed in. Their presence was impossible to ignore. The air seemed to shift when they walked through the door, their confidence filling the space like an invisible banner of importance. They were elite, the best shots on the base. Men who had deployed, who had scars, who carried themselves like gravity bent around them. Their leader was Sergeant Mike, 15 years in uniform, eyes like steel cut from old wars. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. Behind him trailed Corporal James Reed, younger, cockier, his hair cropped sharp, his grin a little too loud. The kind of soldier who needed the room to know he was there. Sarah didn't need to ask what they wanted. She had their rifles pulled from the racks before they even reached the counter. She knew their inventory by heart. That was her job, knowing what belonged where. But what she didn't expect was to overhear the conversation. They were talking about distance, numbers that made the untrained blink in disbelief. 2,000 meters, 3,000. Someone mentioned a record shot, 3,200 meters achieved at a competition. Reed predictably scoffed. That's nothing. I could push it to 3,500, maybe further. The others laughed, but Sarah felt the words pull her in like a magnet. She kept her head down, pretending to check a serial number, but every syllable burned itself into her ears. Skill has limits, reminded him. Beyond a certain distance, it's chance. Wind, temperature, humidity, the earth itself, those decide for you. Sarah knew he was right. She knew because she had been taught differently from most. Her father had raised her at the range, his voice calm, precise, drilling into her head that bullets weren't just speed and noise, they were physics in flight. By 16, she could read a breeze by the bend of grass, judge a drop by instinct. She wasn't a professional, but she had listened. She had learned. So when one of the younger soldiers asked, "What's the longest confirmed kill shot?" and answered, "About 3,540 meters. Canadian sniper. Afghanistan," Sarah's chest tightened. And when Reed scoffed again, when he reduced it all to arrogance, her patience cracked. "Actually, it's not that simple," she heard herself say. Her voice was steady, but her heart slammed hard enough she thought they might see it shaking her uniform. The room went still. Every pair of eyes turned to her. Supply clerk, nobody, background noise in their lives. She wanted to swallow the words back down, but it was too late. She was committed now, like a bullet already leaving the barrel. "At those ranges," she continued, softer now, "you have to account for the Earth's rotation, the curve of the bullet's path, even the altitude where you're standing. It isn't just a matter of guts, it's math, it's patience, it's respect." For a moment, silence. Then Reed smirked, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her desk. And how would you know that, supply clerk? The sneer hit harder than a slap. The words were designed to cut, and they did. She felt her cheeks heat, felt the burn of humiliation she had known too many times in uniform. A woman in a world of men, a clerk among warriors. But she didn't flinch. "Because I've been shooting since I was a kid," she answered. "Because I understand the science behind it." Reed laughed in her face. "What's your longest shot, then?" The truth tasted small as she admitted it. 800 meters. His laughter filled the armory, bouncing off concrete walls. 800, that's beginner stuff, and you're lecturing us. The others shifted uncomfortably, but no one stopped him. No one defended her. Sarah swallowed the sting and reminded herself, stay professional, stay composed. But Reed wasn't done. He leaned in, eyes sharp with something cruel. "Tell you what, there's an old range out past the desert line, goes to 3,800 meters, hasn't been used in years because, well, no one's stupid enough to think they can hit it, but maybe you're stupid enough. You want to prove all that math in your head actually means something, take the shot." The room held its breath. Even looked uneasy. And Sarah, she knew the smart thing would be to ignore him, to laugh it off, to go back to her spreadsheets and weapons racks and anonymity. But inside her, something twisted tight, something she hadn't let herself feel in years, defiance. "All right," she said quietly, "I accept." The grin that spread across Reed's face was victory before the battle. "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, 3,800 meters, don't be late." That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the decision pressing down like armor she hadn't chosen to wear. 3,800 meters, 2 miles and more. Even world-class snipers missed at that distance. Her laptop glowed in the dark as she pulled up ballistics charts, manuals, forum threads, anything that could help her make sense of the impossible. She scribbled numbers in a notebook, the pages filling with corrections, coefficients, calculations that blurred together until her eyes ached. Her phone buzzed. Her brother's name lit the screen. She answered, and before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. "David, I did something stupid." By the time she finished explaining, his disbelief was palpable. 3,800. "Sarah, that's insane. Even pros miss that. Why would you?" "Because he humiliated me," she whispered. "Because if I walk away, I'll be nothing but a joke. I have to try." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "If you're really doing this, you need to know it's more than numbers. You need the right ammo, the right rifle. You need to understand the wind not just here, but across miles of air you can't even feel. And Sarah," his voice softened, "you need to be ready to fail. That distance chews up the best in the world." "I know," she said. Her throat was tight, but she held the words steady. "But I can't back down." Long after the call ended, she kept studying. Every detail mattered. Bullet weight, ballistic coefficient, effect, wind drift. By midnight, her apartment was covered in open books and scribbled notes. And beneath it all, one thought gnawed at her. What if I can't do it? What if they were right all along, that I'm nothing but a clerk pretending to belong? She pressed her forehead to the desk, eyes burning. The shot wasn't just about hitting steel 2 miles away. It was about dignity. About proving to herself that she wasn't invisible. Why did the entire base already know? That was Sarah's first thought the next morning, when the whispers started before she even poured her first cup of coffee in the armory. Soldiers she barely recognized were stopping by, not to check out rifles, but to smirk, to ask questions, to see if the rumors were true. "You're really going up against Reed?" one private asked, eyes wide with the excitement of someone watching a circus. Sarah kept her voice even. "It's not a competition, just a challenge." The private grinned, unconvinced. "Word is you think you can hit a man-sized target at 3,800 meters. People are taking bets." "Bets?" Her stomach tightened. She hadn't agreed to this for entertainment, but she understood. The military thrived on stories, and soldiers were hungry for anything that broke the monotony. Her attempt, her failure most likely, would feed the machine for weeks. By lunchtime, the entire base seemed to know. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with amusement, some with the quiet hope that she'd pull off the impossible. And Sarah, she carried the weight of it like a rucksack that grew heavier with every passing hour. Sergeant Martinez, an older NCO with gray streaks in his hair and a calm voice, stopped by just after noon. He leaned against the counter, watching her check a pistol back into the system. "Heard about your little bet," he said. Sarah braced for ridicule. Instead, he smirked. "About time somebody knocked that kid Reed down a peg." She blinked. "You think I can?" "Doesn't matter," Martinez replied. "Point is, you had the guts to accept. Most people would laughed it off. Win or lose, that counts for something." His words stuck with her, though they didn't lighten the knot in her chest. Later that afternoon, Master Sergeant Williams walked in. Sarah had always admired her, professional, respected, the kind of leader others straightened their backs for when she entered a room. Williams studied her for a moment, then spoke simply. "I hear you took Reed's challenge." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said carefully. Williams's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Good. He's needed humbling for a long time. Even if you miss, I respect that you didn't back down." Sarah swallowed, unsure whether to feel comforted or crushed. "Ma'am, I don't know if I can hit it, not at that distance." "Probably not," Williams admitted without hesitation. Then her eyes softened. "But that's not the point, specialist. Sometimes standing up is more important than landing the shot." That night, Sarah drove into town. The fluorescent lights of the sporting goods store buzzed above her as she picked through items most soldiers wouldn't have thought twice about: wind meters, notebooks, high-quality match-grade rounds. To anyone else, it was just gear. To her, it was the difference between walking into humiliation unarmed and at least giving herself a chance. Back in her apartment, she turned the small living room into a war room of numbers. Trajectory charts covered the coffee table. Her notebook filled with careful scribbles, temperature conversions, humidity factors, wind estimates. She downloaded a ballistics app and ran scenario after scenario until her phone battery bled dry. She learned something sobering. At 3,800 meters, even the tiniest miscalculation could send a bullet yards wide. A degree off, a gust misread, the wrong round weight, it all meant failure. The margin of error was cruelly thin. And yet the numbers also whispered possibility. Under perfect conditions, with patience and calculation, the shot wasn't impossible. Unlikely, yes, but not impossible. Sarah clung to that sliver of hope like a lifeline. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was fractured, filled with dreams of endless desert, and a target always just beyond reach. She woke before dawn, her chest tight with nerves. The day of the challenge. She checked the weather immediately. Partly cloudy, light winds. Better than she could ask for. She dressed in her uniform with deliberate care, every button fastened as if control over cloth and thread could give her control over the chaos ahead. At the Armory, she chose her weapon carefully. A precision bolt-action rifle chambered in .338 Magnum, equipped with one of the base's finest long-range scopes. She handled it like something fragile, reverent. Each round she loaded was weighed with intent. Throughout the morning, soldiers drifted in. Some offered quiet words of encouragement, others smirked, eager for the show. Then Sergeant appeared. He looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic. "Martinez," he said quietly, "whatever happens out there, know this. Reed was out of line. You don't have anything to prove." Sarah met his eyes. "But I do, at least to myself." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll make sure it's fair, professional." By 2 o'clock, she loaded her equipment into a military vehicle and headed for the old range. The desert stretched wide around her, the sky too big, the silence too heavy. She gripped the steering wheel, every mile bringing her closer to judgment. When she arrived, her breath caught. She hadn't expected this many people. Dozens of soldiers had gathered, some with folding chairs, others with coolers, as if it were a spectacle, a sport. Word had traveled faster than wildfire, and now she was the unwilling center of attention. Reed was already there, leaning against a vehicle, laughing with his friends. His confidence radiated across the sand. When he saw her, he called out, loud enough for all to hear. "Well, look who showed. I was starting to think the supply clerk grew a brain overnight." The crowd chuckled. Sarah ignored him. She focused on setting up. Every motion was deliberate, rifle out, bipod steady, scope aligned. Her wind meter flickered numbers across its screen, whispering secrets about invisible forces that would make or break her. She logged them all. Temperature 78°F, humidity 34%, barometric pressure steady, altitude 3,200 feet. Her notebook filled with figures. Each number was another thread in the fragile web that might catch her bullet before it fell into nothing. At 3,800 meters, the bullet would drop nearly 90 feet. She dialed the elevation adjustments carefully, the clicks of the scope's turret precise, unforgiving. Wind, always the enemy, was trickier. A light breeze at her shoulder, shifting, teasing, never constant. She studied the terrain, the dust devils spinning in the valley, the way small hills carved shadows in the air itself. She felt like she was trying to read the language of ghosts. The crowd buzzed. Someone asked if she was ready. Reed smirked, arms crossed. "Bring your calculator, Professor," he mocked. Sarah didn't look up. She adjusted her position, the rifle steady against her shoulder, the target a speck barely visible even at maximum magnification. She breathed slowly, shutting out the noise, the doubt, the stares. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about the outcome, just the fundamentals." Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. First shot. The rifle cracked, the sound cutting the desert silence like a blade. The bullet vanished into distance, unseen, unheard. Seconds stretched like minutes. 30 pairs of eyes strained toward the far-off target. No visible impact, the spotter called finally. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Reed grinned, his confidence swelling. Sarah exhaled slowly. She had expected this. The first shot was never about hitting. It was about learning, gathering data, reading the silence between the lines. She made adjustments, slightly higher, a little more left. Second shot. The crack split the air again, the bullet racing across miles. This time, a puff of dust blossomed just to the right of the target. 2 feet right, the spotter shouted. The crowd gasped. Even Reed's smirk faltered. Sarah's pulse quickened. She was close, so close. She adjusted again, small corrections. Left, steady, breathe. The crowd fell silent, sensing the moment tightening. Third shot. But just as her finger began to press, a gust of wind ripped across her position, tugging at her uniform, scattering sand. She froze. She could fire and fail, or wait. Reed called out, mocking, "What's the holdup, afraid?" Sarah ignored him. She waited, patient, steady, as the desert stilled once more. Then she fired. The crack echoed, the bullet leaping into the unknown. Time slowed. Every soldier leaned forward, breath held. Sarah's eye never left the scope, her world reduced to crosshairs and horizon. And then, impact, the spotter's voice cut the silence, confirmed hit on target. The desert erupted. Cheers, disbelief, voices shouting over one another. Sarah lowered the rifle, heart hammering, ears ringing, not from the gunfire, but from the roar of realization. She had done it. She had hit 3,800 meters. Against arrogance, against doubt, against herself. The shot wasn't just steel meeting lead. It was dignity made visible. And in that moment, Sarah Martinez, the invisible supply clerk, was invisible no more. Why was it so quiet? That was Sarah's first thought as she lowered her cheek from the rifle stock. Dozens of soldiers had gathered. The desert air had been loud with their laughter, their banter, their mocking bets. But now, silence. Only the sound of wind brushing across sand, the faint mechanical hum of a spotting scope, and her own heartbeat hammering in her chest. Then the voice cut across the stillness, sharp, official, impossible to mistake. Confirmed target hit. Repeat, confirmed impact on silhouette. For a second, no one moved, as though disbelief itself had weight, as though the world wasn't ready to accept what had just happened. And then it broke. Cheers exploded. Boots stamped the ground. Soldiers who had bet against her clutched their heads in astonishment, while others shouted her name like it was suddenly worth remembering. Sarah blinked, stunned, her fingers still curled around the rifle's grip. Had she really done it? Or was this some trick of the mirage, some desperate illusion her mind had conjured? But then Sergeant was at her side, hand extended, his eyes not steel now but warm with respect. Outstanding shooting, Martinez. That wasn't luck, that was preparation and discipline. You earned it. She took his hand automatically, her own still trembling. The words wouldn't come. She wasn't sure what to say. Other soldiers swarmed around her. Some clapped her on the back. Others crowded to see the rifle, the scope, her notebook filled with scribbled numbers. A few, younger ones, asked questions rapid fire. What correction did you use? How high did you dial? Did you actually measure the wind all the way out? Sarah tried to answer, but her mind was a blur. The sound of celebration crashed against the walls of her skull. She felt detached, as if she were floating outside her own body, watching someone else be congratulated. And then she saw him. Corporal Reed. He stood apart, arms crossed tight, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the distant target as though staring long enough might undo reality. His confident grin had evaporated. His face was pale, empty. The soldiers noticed. Silence rippled through the crowd again, a shift in energy, all eyes turning. Everyone remembered the terms. Reed had promised. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, that he'd storm off, make excuses, claim luck or fluke or trickery. But slowly, stiffly, he stepped forward. He stopped in front of her, eyes on the ground, voice low enough that only those closest could hear. I guess I owe you an apology, and I'll handle your paperwork like we agreed. She could have gloated, could have smiled triumphantly, humiliated him the way he had humiliated her. The crowd was hungry for it. They wanted a reversal. They wanted the arrogant sniper crushed beneath her victory. But Sarah only shook her head. No hard feelings, Corporal. We both learned something today. The grace in her voice was louder than any boast could have been. Reed gave a short nod, then turned and walked away, shoulders hunched. His friends hesitated before following, leaving behind a buzz of whispers. Sergeant lingered. Martinez, have you ever considered sniper training? The question caught her off guard. She let out a shaky laugh. I wasn't even sure I could make that shot. I've never thought about anything beyond this armory. Tilted his head. Well, maybe you should. Talent's one thing. But the way you approach this, methodical, patient, calm under pressure, that's what separates good shooters from great ones. He left her with that thought, but it clung to her like a shadow all the way back to her vehicle. The drive across the desert felt unreal. The rifle rested beside her, the air thick with dust, the horizon stretching wide, endless. She replayed the moment again and again in her mind. The hesitation before the trigger, the crack of the rifle, the silence, the call of confirmation. Had she really done it? Or had the desert simply granted her mercy once, never to be repeated? When she returned to the armory, soldiers were already waiting. Word had spread faster than she could drive. Some congratulated her with genuine awe. Others demanded details, skeptical, wanting proof. Is it true? One asked. Did you really hit it at 3800? Sarah hesitated. Yes, but it wasn't just skill. Conditions were good, I got lucky. No, another soldier interrupted. Luck doesn't land a bullet at that distance. You did something special. She tried to smile, but it felt heavy, because the truth she carried inside was complicated. It wasn't about luck and it wasn't about skill. It was about dignity, about refusing to be silent when silence would have broken her. That night her phone rang. Her brother's voice was breathless. "Sarah, I just heard. Someone called me from a unit near your base. Did you really hit 3800?" Sarah lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion pressing down. "I did. I don't even know how. It just came together." "I do," David said firmly. "You studied, you prepared, you didn't back down, that's who you are." His words should have comforted her. Instead, they sank into her chest like stones, because she wasn't sure who she was anymore. The Armory clerk, the invisible girl with the spreadsheets, or the soldier who had just landed a shot that even seasoned snipers might never touch. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the desert, saw the tiny speck of a target across endless sand, saw the bullet's journey she could never truly witness, only imagine. And beneath it all, a thought whispered, quiet but insistent, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But the weight of it pressed down harder than the rifle had against her shoulder. Sometimes silence isn't broken by words. It's broken by action. And hers had spoken louder than she had ever dared to dream. Why was she being summoned to the commander's office? That was the thought that gnawed at Sarah all morning. Soldiers didn't just get called up by the colonel unless they'd messed up, or unless something extraordinary had happened. But extraordinary was the last thing she wanted. She had lived her military life beneath notice, steady and unseen, the Armory clerk whose name didn't echo outside a logbook. Now, 24 hours after her shot, she couldn't walk across the base without hearing whispers. 3800, did you hear? That supply clerk. Martinez, she actually hit it. The stories twisted, grew, spread. Some said she had made the shot blindfolded. Others claimed it was a fluke, a one-in-a-million miracle. Some were certain she had been secretly trained all along. Sarah said nothing. She kept her head down, eyes on her work, but inside her chest beat a rhythm of unease. The desert silence had spoken for her yesterday, and now it seemed she had no way to quiet it again. When the message came, report to Colonel's office at 1500, her pulse spiked. She had never spoken to the man directly. He commanded the entire base, carried the weight of decades, and his decisions could change a career in an instant. By the time she stood outside his office door, her palms were damp, her throat dry. She adjusted her uniform twice, checked her reflection in the glass, then forced herself to knock. "Enter." His voice was steady, clipped, unmistakable. Sarah stepped inside. Colonel sat behind a wide desk cluttered not with disorder but with history, photos from deployments, commendations framed in glass, the silent reminders of wars fought far from here. His eyes were sharp but not unkind. He gestured for her to sit. "Specialist Martinez." She sat, posture stiff, unsure if she should apologize, explain, or simply wait for judgment. The colonel leaned back, studying her for a moment. "I've been hearing some interesting reports about your activities yesterday afternoon." "Yes, sir," Sarah said, her voice careful. "If I overstepped." "Relax." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're not in trouble, quite the opposite, in fact." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "I read Sergeant's report," he continued. "I also spoke with several witnesses. What you accomplished out at that old range is remarkable. Frankly, it's the kind of thing that doesn't happen by accident." Her instinct was to downplay. "I did a lot of research the night before, sir. I got lucky with conditions." "Perhaps." Eyes narrowed slightly. "But luck doesn't explain your preparation. Measuring wind, logging conditions, calculating drop, making disciplined adjustments. That's more than instinct. That's systematic thinking under pressure. His words landed heavier than applause, heavier than cheers, because they pierced deeper, touched something she wasn't sure she believed about herself. He opened a file on his desk. I reviewed your personnel record. Your aptitude scores are high, particularly in technical fields. Your supervisors describe you as meticulous, detail-oriented, not the qualities most expect in a supply clerk. Sarah shifted in her chair, uneasy under the weight of his gaze. With respect, sir, I'm not combat trained. I've never even thought about anything outside the armory. That may be true, the colonel said, but some of our best specialists didn't begin in combat roles. Potential is more important than background. He paused, then leaned forward. Martinez, have you ever considered sniper training? Her breath caught. It was the same suggestion Sargent had made, but here, spoken by the base commander, it carried the weight of destiny. I know, sir, she stammered. I assumed that was for infantry, for people with experience. That used to be the case, said, but modern operations are changing. We need shooters who can do more than pull a trigger. We need minds that can calculate under pressure, adapt to variables, solve problems others overlook. Yesterday, you demonstrated all of that. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were papers, applications, training outlines, a roadmap that seemed unreal. The sniper course lasts 14 weeks. Advanced marksmanship, fieldcraft, camouflage, observation, mission planning. It's one of the most demanding schools in the military. The failure rate is over 60%. Sarah stared at the papers. Her throat tightened. 14 weeks of pushing beyond everything she knew. 14 weeks of proving or failing. What happens if I can't make it? She asked softly. You return to your current role. No penalty, no shame. But you'll walk away with skills that will serve you for life. His tone softened, the edge of command giving way to something more personal. Martinez, I want you to understand. You don't have to say yes, but opportunities like this don't come often. And whether you realize it or not, you've already proven you belong in more than the shadows of an armory. Sarah's chest ached with conflict. She thought of her parents, her father teaching her the basics of shooting at a dusty range, telling her preparation mattered more than talent. She thought of Reed's laughter, the sting of humiliation, the surge of defiance that had driven her to accept. She thought of the silence after her shot, the silence that had changed everything. I'll need time, sir, she said at last. Of course. He pushed the folder closer. Think carefully, speak with your family, but know this, whatever you decide, you've already proven something about yourself. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. When she left his office, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the base. She clutched the folder like it was a live thing, fragile and dangerous. Soldiers passed her, some nodding in recognition, some whispering her name. But all she could hear was the colonel's voice, echoing. Opportunities like this don't come often. That night Sarah called home. Her mother's voice cracked with worry. Sniper training, Sarah, that's dangerous. You'd be out there in combat zones. Her father's voice was steadier, proud. Sarah, you've always risen to meet challenges. This is your chance to see how far you can go. Her brother, when she told him, was silent for a long time. Then he said, if anyone can do it, it's you. But don't do it to prove Reed wrong. Do it because you believe in yourself. She hung up with her heart heavy, torn between fear and fire. The papers lay on her desk, training schedules, requirements, promises of a life she hadn't dared to imagine. She stared at them until her eyes blurred. Was she ready? Was she capable? Was she willing to trade the safety of invisibility for the brutal clarity of expectation? The desert had given her one answer, but the next one, this one, would come only from within. Why did she sign the papers? That was the question Sarah asked herself the moment she handed the folder back to Colonel's aide. Her signature was there, ink drying on the application for sniper school, a decision that would drag her far beyond the neat, quiet rows of the Armory. She could have said no. She could have walked away, claimed her dignity from the desert, and settled back into anonymity. But something inside her wouldn't allow it. Maybe it was the shot. Maybe it was the look in Reed's eyes when silence proved louder than mockery. Maybe it was her father's voice in her head, reminding her that preparation mattered more than talent. Or maybe it was simply this: she was tired of being invisible. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Physical training pushed her body into exhaustion she hadn't known it could survive. Running until her lungs screamed, climbing walls, hauling weights that felt heavier than her own doubts. She had never been an athlete, never been the strongest or fastest. Every day she came in last in something. Every day she fought not to collapse. But every day she also returned. In the quiet hours she studied. Ballistics charts, camouflage patterns, observation drills. Numbers made sense to her when nothing else did. If her body lagged, her mind carried her forward. By the time the 14-week sniper course began, Sarah was already stretched thin. Yet the real test was only just beginning. The instructors wasted no time. On day one, they stripped the candidates of comfort. Uniforms soaked with sweat, boots caked in mud, packs cutting deep into shoulders. They crawled through dirt until their elbows bled. They lay motionless in grass for hours while instructors walked within feet, daring them to twitch. It was brutal, and Sarah struggled. Her classmates were infantrymen, scouts, combat veterans with hardened bodies and combat instincts. They were used to mud in their teeth and blood on their hands. Sarah was used to ledgers, to clean boots on concrete floors. The first week she failed more tasks than she passed. Her camouflage was sloppy, her stalking noisy, her body too slow. At night, lying in her bunk with muscles screaming, she wondered if Reed had been right after all. Maybe she didn't belong here. But then came the shooting. On the range, rifle in hand, she felt something shift. While others relied on instinct, Sarah leaned on calculation. She measured the wind with a flick of grass, adjusted elevation by the click of a scope turret, logged numbers with methodical precision. The targets dropped, one after another. An instructor, a veteran with years in combat zones, watched her carefully. "You're not the strongest," he said quietly after one session, "but you're consistent. Don't underestimate that. Consistency wins more battles than muscle ever will." His words became her anchor. Weeks turned into months. The course pushed harder, stalking drills where a single snapped twig meant failure, observation tests where she had to identify tiny changes across sprawling landscapes, endless lectures on atmospherics, mission planning, escape routes. Her body broke and healed, broke again and hardened. Her elbows grew calloused from crawling, her lungs adapted to long runs with heavy gear. She was never the fastest, but she stopped being the last. The academic side, where others struggled, became her strength. She solved equations quickly, memorized trajectory shifts, explained the effect to classmates who grumbled at the complexity. Slowly, their skepticism faded. They stopped calling her the Clerk. They started calling her Martinez. Still, doubt lingered. Every night she asked herself, "Am I strong enough? Am I ready for this world where failure can mean death, not embarrassment?" One evening, after a particularly grueling field exercise, Sarah sat alone on a hill overlooking the training grounds. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in muted gold. Her rifle lay across her lap, familiar now, less a tool and more a companion. She thought of the Armory, the dust, the spreadsheets, the anonymity she had once believed was safety. She thought of Reed's laughter, of his encouragement, of her father's voice. And she realized something. This wasn't about proving Reed wrong anymore. It wasn't even about proving herself right. It was about finding out who she was when silence demanded action. By the final weeks, Sarah was different. Her body was leaner, her movements quieter, her eyes sharper. She had endured nights of lying motionless in freezing mud, days of calculating shots in shifting winds. She had failed often, but she had learned more from failure than she ever had from success. The final examination came with little warning. A simulated mission: infiltrate an area, remain undetected, and neutralize a high-value target at long range. The instructors didn't soften it. The terrain was brutal, the weather shifting, the target distant and partially concealed. Sarah spent hours planning. She studied the landscape, charted the wind, marked escape routes. While others rushed, she calculated. When the moment came, she lay prone in the grass, body steady, rifle aligned. The target, a silhouette at 2,200 meters, was barely visible. Her heart raced, but her breathing was calm. She squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed. The silhouette dropped. First round. The instructors nodded, scribbled notes. Her classmates whispered, impressed. For Sarah, the moment stretched, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a bullet through steel. It was every failure, every doubt, every night spent questioning if she belonged. It was her father's lessons, her brother's warnings, Williams's encouragements, belief, and her own stubborn refusal to back down. 2 weeks later, she stood on a graduation platform. The sniper's badge gleamed on her chest, small but impossibly heavy. The ceremony passed in a blur, the speeches, the handshakes, the applause. When her name was called, she stepped forward with steady feet. Not the clerk who had once hidden behind inventory sheets, but a soldier who had proven she could endure the hardest course the military demanded. Afterward, Major Collins, one of her instructors, approached her. His eyes were sharp but approving. "Martinez," he said, "in 20 years of teaching this course, I've seen all kinds. Muscle-bound athletes who crumbled, hardened veterans who broke. You're different. You combine calculation with discipline. That's rare. And that's why you finished at the top of your class." The words struck deep, not because of pride, but because of what they meant. She had endured. She had transformed. But as Collins spoke of assignments, deployments, real-world missions, Sarah felt a chill, because training was one thing, combat was another. And now, for the first time, the silence of war itself waited for her. Why did her chest feel so tight? That was the question Sarah kept asking herself as the transport plane thundered through dark clouds, carrying her toward her first mission. She had trained, endured, transformed. She had earned the sniper's badge that rested over her heart. But training was safe in its own brutal way. Training was controlled, measured. This was different. This was the real world. 8 weeks after graduation, Sarah had been assigned to a forward-deployed security detail. Their mission was to provide overwatch for American diplomats attending sensitive negotiations in Eastern Europe, a region teetering on the edge of hostility, where one wrong move could ignite something larger. It was the kind of assignment that required calm precision, the kind of assignment where failure wasn't scored with red ink, but with blood. As the plane rattled through turbulence, Sarah closed her eyes and pressed her palms against her knees. She reminded herself to breathe, slow and steady. She pictured her rifle, the feel of the stock against her shoulder, the rhythm of preparation. She tried to anchor herself to that. When the plane landed, the cold air hit like a slap. Europe smelled different: old stone, damp earth, something weary in the air itself. Their forward base was tucked into a quiet town, a place with cobblestone streets and walls by history. Soldiers unloaded crates. Diplomats rehearsed speeches. And Sarah, the once invisible Armory clerk, stepped into a world she had only imagined. Major Collins, now her commanding officer, briefed the team. "Our job is simple in description, complex in execution. We protect the diplomats. We watch the rooftops, the windows, the alleys. If trouble comes, we see it before it reaches them." He looked at Sarah specifically. "Martinez, you'll be primary sniper for Overwatch. You'll have a partner as spotter. Your eyes, your trigger, may be the difference between safety and disaster." Her stomach tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, sir." The first days were consumed with preparation. Reconnaissance of rooftops, measuring fields of fire, logging wind patterns through narrow streets. Sarah filled notebooks with sketches and numbers the same way she had in training. Only this time every variable was not theoretical. Civilians moved through the streets. Children played in alleys. Vendors shouted prices at open markets. Life pulsed through the city, and somewhere within it, threats might be hiding. On the morning of the negotiations, Sarah took her position in an abandoned building across from the meeting hall. Her rifle rested steady on a bipod, scope glinting faintly in the pale sun. Her spotter, a sergeant named Hale, sat beside her with binoculars. "Wind's light," Hale murmured. "Quartering left, you good?" Sarah adjusted her scope. "I'm good." But inside, her heart pounded. Through her lens, she scanned the rooftops opposite, the windows overlooking the square, the corners where shadows pooled. Her training told her what to look for: a glint of glass, the unnatural stillness of someone waiting, a figure moving where no one should. Minutes crawled. Diplomats arrived, stepping from armored vehicles, their suits sharp, their faces taut with nerves. Soldiers secured the perimeter, radios buzzing. Sarah's rifle tracked with every detail, her body still, her finger resting near the trigger but not yet pressing. She told herself to breathe, to remember fundamentals, to let patience guide her. An hour passed, nothing, only the restless life of the city muted by tension. Then Hale stiffened. "Window, third floor, 2 o'clock." Sarah swung her scope. A curtain shifted. For a fraction of a second, a glint, metallic, sharp, undeniable. Her pulse spiked. "Possible scope," she whispered. The curtain twitched again. A shadow moved. Sarah exhaled, steady. Her fingers settled on the trigger. Through her lens, the world narrowed, the building, the window, the faint shape behind it. She calculated instinctively. Distance just under 700 meters, wind negligible, elevation correction minimal. She squeezed. The crack of her rifle echoed through the square, silencing the murmur of civilians, freezing the moment in a suspended breath. Glass shattered, the curtain ripped back, a figure slumped. Chaos erupted below, soldiers shouting, civilians ducking, diplomats rushed toward armored vehicles. But Sarah didn't move. She kept her eye on the scope, scanning, searching for a second threat. None came. Her first shot in combat, her first real test, and she had hit. Later, when the square was cleared and the diplomats escorted to safety, Sarah sat in the empty building, rifle still warm, hands trembling. Hale looked at her. "Good shot, saved lives." She nodded numbly, but inside she felt something heavier than pride. Because the target she had hit wasn't steel, wasn't silhouette, it was flesh. A life ended by her trigger pull. That night, lying in a cot in a foreign barracks, Sarah stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She replayed the moment again and again. The glint in the window, the squeeze of the trigger, the body collapsing. She reminded herself, it was necessary, it was justified. If she hadn't fired, someone else would be dead, maybe many. But the weight didn't lift. She understood now, in a way training could never teach, that every shot carried more than ballistics. It carried consequence. It carried silence that didn't cheer but haunted. And she realized something that chilled her. The hardest part of being a sniper wasn't the math, or the patience, or even the pressure. It was living with the silence after the shot. Why couldn't she sleep? That was the question Sarah asked herself in the dim hours after her first mission. The barracks were quiet, soldiers breathing steadily in their bunks, the hum of heaters filling the silence. But Sarah lay awake, eyes wide, the ceiling pressing down like stone. Her fingers still tingled, phantom pressure from the trigger that had ended a life. Everyone else seemed to move on quickly. The diplomats had praised the security team. The commanders called it a textbook mission. Hale had clapped her on the shoulder and told her she'd saved lives. But none of that quieted the image replaying in her mind, the flicker of movement in that third-floor window, the way the curtain had rippled just before her shot, the collapse of a figure she would never know. For hours she lay there, telling herself it was justified, necessary, clean. So why did it feel heavy? Days passed. Sarah moved through her duties with precision, cleaning her rifle, running drills, logging atmospheric notes out of habit. But the silence around her felt different now. Before, silence had been safety, comfort, a shield against being noticed. Now silence pressed like a weight, reminding her of what she had done. She didn't tell anyone, she didn't have the words. The other soldiers were hardened, used to combat, jokes bouncing between them like armor. To admit she was struggling felt like weakness, so she carried it alone. Until one night, sitting on the rooftop they had used for overwatch, she found herself speaking without meaning to. "Do you ever think about them?" she asked Hale quietly. He didn't answer immediately. He just kept his eyes on the dark horizon where city lights flickered faintly against the cold night. Finally, he said, "All the time, but you can't let it freeze you. You think about them, then you put it in a box. Otherwise, you'll never fire again." Sarah frowned. "And if I don't want to put it in a box?" Hale glanced at her, eyes steady. "Then it'll eat you alive." His answer stayed with her, bitter and unfinished. She tried to bury herself in routine, waking early, running until her lungs burned, drilling calculations until numbers blurred on the page. But at night, the silence always came. The silence of a man who would never breathe again because of her. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something more complicated, a recognition of the power she carried, a weight she hadn't fully understood until now. Weeks later, another mission came. Different city, different rooftop. Another negotiation where safety was fragile and danger lurked unseen. Sarah took her position, scope sweeping across windows and alleys, every sense tuned to the possibility of threat. This time no shot came. No glint of glass, no flicker of danger. Hours passed in silence, the mission ending without violence. Yet Sarah found herself shaking afterward, as if her body had braced for something her mind couldn't endure again. She realized then that being a sniper wasn't just about shooting. It was about waiting. Waiting for a moment that might never come, or might come in a flash so sudden you had no choice but to decide in a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, lives hung in balance. Back at base, she found herself writing in her notebook at night. Not just numbers now, but thoughts, reflections, words she couldn't say aloud. Every shot is two stories, the one I save and the one I end. How do I live with both? The notebook became her silent confession, pages filling with questions she couldn't answer. When Major Collins called her into his office weeks later, she half expected reprimand. Instead, he studied her with that sharp, assessing gaze. "You're performing well," he said. "Disciplined, reliable, but you're carrying something heavy." Sarah froze, "Sir." He leaned forward. "Don't bother denying it. Every sniper I've trained faces it eventually. The silence after the shot, it gets into your head." Her throat tightened. "How do you deal with it?" Collins's expression was unreadable. "By remembering why we pull the trigger in the first place. It's never about ending a life. It's about protecting others. If you can hold on to that, the silence becomes bearable. If you can't, it doesn't." His words were simple, but they struck deep. That night, Sarah reread her notebook. Her own words stared back at her, sharp and unflinching. She thought about the diplomats she'd seen walking safely to their vehicles, unaware of the shadow that had almost reached them. She thought about the families that went home that night because she had fired. And for the first time, the weight shifted slightly. Not gone, not light, but balanced. Months passed. Missions came and went, some silent, some loud. Each one etched itself into her, changing her slowly like stone shaped by wind. She grew quieter, more deliberate. She laughed less, but when she spoke, people listened. The soldiers around her began to look at her differently. Not as the clerk who once surprised them with an impossible shot, but as a sniper, steady, prepared, disciplined. Yet inside, she carried both selves, the invisible supply clerk and the soldier whose trigger had changed lives. One night, alone on a rooftop after a successful mission, she whispered into the darkness, not to anyone, not even to herself, but to the silence that had become her constant companion. "I didn't choose this, but I won't run from it either." The wind carried her words away. The city below slept. And Sarah, for the first time since that desert afternoon months ago, felt the faintest sense of peace. Because she was beginning to understand that being a sniper wasn't about glory or records or even the impossible shots that made people whisper your name. It was about bearing the silence and learning to live with what it meant. Why did it all begin with a bet? Sarah asked herself that more than once. She stood now in a place far from Fort Harrison, far from the armory where she had once been invisible. Yet every time she steadied her rifle, every time she listened to the silence that followed a shot, she traced it back to that afternoon when Reed's laughter had cut her pride and she had chosen not to back down. That moment had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. Months had passed. Missions had piled one after another, each leaving its mark. Sarah had grown steadier, quieter. Her team trusted her. Command respected her. The world that had once ignored her now depended on her in ways she still struggled to believe. But tonight, standing on a rooftop in another cold city, Sarah felt the same tightness in her chest she had felt the very first time. The same tremor in her hands that training had never completely erased. Because this mission was different. Intelligence had warned of an imminent attack on the very diplomats she and her team were sworn to protect. Unlike other assignments, this wasn't about watching for a possibility. It was about certainty. Somewhere out there in the maze of buildings, another sniper was waiting. Someone trained, someone skilled, someone who had chosen their silence for the opposite reason, not to protect, but to kill. Sarah lay prone, her rifle steady, her breath fogging faintly in the cold night air. Hale crouched beside her, scanning with binoculars. "Nothing yet," he muttered. She didn't answer. Her scope swept window to window, rooftop to rooftop. Every shadow seemed alive. Every flicker of movement made her heart pound. Minutes dragged. The diplomats entered the meeting hall below, unaware of the crosshairs that might already be seeking them. And then a glint. Her pulse surged. A window, fourth floor, narrow slit between curtains, the faintest shimmer of glass catching the streetlight. "Got him," she whispered. Hale locked on with his binoculars. "Confirmed. Weapon. He's lining up." Sarah's body tensed. Her finger hovered. She had seconds. She thought of all the hours of training, all the nights awake with silence pressing on her chest. She thought of her father's words, "Preparation matters more than talent." She thought of Reed's laughter, of the desert shot that had changed her life, of every mission since. And she realized something she hadn't before. This wasn't about the shot. It wasn't about the record, the distance, or even her own survival. It was about the lives below her, men and women who would never know her name, who would never understand that their safety hung on her silence. Her breath slowed, her body steadied. She squeezed. The crack split the night, the window shattered. Through her scope, she saw the figure slump back into darkness. The danger was over. Below, the meeting continued uninterrupted. Diplomats shook hands, soldiers secured the perimeter, life moved forward as if nothing had happened. Only Sarah knew what the silence had cost. Later, back at base, Hale clapped her shoulder. "Clean, perfect, you saved them all." Sarah nodded, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Because she understood now that silence wasn't just the space after a shot. It was the measure of everything unspoken. The lives saved, the lives ended, the weight carried quietly by those who chose to bear it. Weeks later, orders came for her transfer. Another assignment, another city, another mission waiting. On her last day at the Armory, the same armory she had once walked into with coffee in hand, the same place where Reed had laughed, where silence had first demanded her answer, Sarah returned one final time. The racks of rifles stood the same. The smell of gun oil clung to the air. The new clerk looked up from the counter, young, distracted, unaware of the weight these walls carried. "You're Martinez, right?" he asked suddenly. "The one who made that crazy 3800 shot. Everyone talks about it." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's me." He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true? That's why you became a sniper?" Sarah looked around at the rows of weapons, at the quiet space where her journey had begun. She thought of the desert, of the notebooks filled with calculations, of the first impossible impact that had shattered her invisibility. She thought of the lives saved since, the weight carried since. "In a way," she said softly, "but really it was about not backing down. Sometimes the hardest challenges are the ones we never ask for, the ones we don't even think we can survive, but if you face them, they change you." The clerk nodded, not fully understanding. How could he? Sarah walked out of the armory for the last time, the door closing quietly behind her. The future waited, unknown, heavy, demanding. But she was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the supply clerk who kept weapons in order. She was the soldier who had learned that silence can wound, silence can protect, silence can define. And as she stepped into the wide world beyond, she carried with her the truth that had shaped her from the very beginning. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.